Commissioner of the South African Police Service, Lieutenant General Atani, as well as the National Head of the Directorate of Priority Crime Investigation, Lieutenant General, and not Major, to the members of the Major. The Major is the Lieutenant General. With those few words, I will then give this opportunity to the Minister to address us. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We have taken a position to step out and clarify some of the issues, and particularly the fact that there have been a number of issues that have been in the public space and public media and so on, affecting the policing institution in this country. So in a sense, everything has been said about us and for us, and we just do think that it can only be correct for us to begin to clarify some of the matters as they have tended to manifest themselves in the public discourse. The starting point that we want to address is that it is a historical fact that the policy prescripts of the African National Congress locate the principle of equality at the center of the struggle for social justice in pursuit of the equitable distribution of the social burden and social goods, including judicial justice. Now, whilst we're on this point, it is a known fact that on the 15th of June, 1995, the ANC, in its final submissions to the drafting of the Constitution to the Constituent Assembly, emphasized on this particular point, that if South Africa is to become a humane society, it has got to center itself around issues of peace, justice, and development. The key critical ingredient of attaining peace, justice, and development in our society is the question of equality. And that's what we submitted as the final policy position. And that policy position is derived from what the Freedom Charter also dictated back in 1955. And that Freedom Charter states that our country will never be prosperous or free until all our people live in brotherhood, enjoying equal rights and opportunities. Again, the point of emphasis is the question of equal rights, and your equal rights bring about peace, development, and everything else, and that includes the question of opportunities. It links prosperity to justice and fairness, and so it has always been our understanding, ladies and gentlemen, that we first needed a just order so that we can attain peace, as peace is a necessary condition for prosperity or development. The injustice and unfairness of apartheid colonialism had to be defeated, replaced by a just order, because that injustice denied our people peace, as the Charter also asserted on this question, that our people have been robbed of their birthright to land, liberty, and peace by a form of government founded on injustice and inequality. As the cliche goes, there can be no peace without justice, and no development and prosperity without peace. Whilst shared prosperity improves the potential for lasting peace, the pursuit of prosperity can never be used as a reason to tamper with the foundations of a just order. Allowing the foundations to become unjust by favoring some and not others will lead to a generalized discontent and slowly but surely plant the seeds for civil strife and or war, a fruit definitely not worth tasting. From time to time, some sections of our communities criticize police action for a myriad of reasons. We accept this criticism as an important aspect of our people's freedom of expression and popular oversight. It releases social wisdom and frees the people's voices, helping to expose angles that could be blind spots to law enforcement practitioners and brings about constructive criticism. All the people of our land are entitled to this right, and we need more practical expression of it. However, in the recent past, we have witnessed what we consider to be unfair, malicious, and personal criticism. In the recent statement, the South African Communist Party alleges that the Hawks have a mandate to harass the party. Now, we should also be reminded, ladies and gentlemen, that the South African Communist Party is an organization committed to scientific socialism and the pursuit of truth through facts. And what then is puzzling is that we find a situation where the party is criticizing others through rumors and faceless officials. The statement issued alleges political motivation as the real basis for some cases. We disagree with this and challenge not only the South African Communist Party but all South Africans to show us one political organization whose members have not at one time or another faced a focused eye of the law enforcement, or one organization that has not had its member or members investigated for one reason or the other. Some of the issues that apparently ike the party relate to issues that have to do with the invasive powers of intelligence work, precisely because of their invasiveness, as well as their capacity to deny people personal freedom and human dignity. Those powers are kept by the Bill of Fundamental Human Rights in our Constitution. Laws have been enacted to compartmentalize and restrict intelligence work, and therefore what begs as a question in this particular instance is whether or not are we being challenged to ignore the Bill of Fundamental Human Rights. Finally, the party talks about former special branch members in the police. Now, in addressing this question, there are few aspects that one would have to focus on. First and foremost is that apartheid was a social system. Secondly, that many institutions existed before democracy. They existed during the days of apartheid. Some of you were journalists in the apartheid days. But the question would then arise whether or not should we then also refer to you as apartheid journalist, for an example. And if we do, would that be called fair? And I don't think it would be fair necessarily. So when we deal with this particular question, we need to be quite careful about it. I'm raising this issue because not only now and in the recent past, we've had to hear stories of some of our officials being apartheid police members and so on. And of course, that would be in the cause of people advancing particular positions. We don't have a problem with advocating and advancing positions and so on, but I think we should be subjected to fair criticism at all material times. But I can also state that, and this point perhaps should also be subjected to political engagement, discussion, and all other consideration. The fact of the matter is, white police officials, both in the army and in defense, were ideologically mobilized to sign up with the police service and the army. But the bulk of your black and particularly African police members were ordinarily employees and as a result a force multiplier in there. But they were not ideologically mobilized to sign up with the police service and so on. As the developments would have it, when democracy was then ushered, by way of an example, there was some form of natural forms of realignment and gravitation of sorts that took place. Those that were ideologically mobilized to be in the police service and or in the army, for an example, it was a natural gravitation for them to identify with the white cause and the cause of the minority in this country, and so on. But also the bulk that was not ideologically mobilized to be in there. It was also a matter of natural cause that they identified themselves with the cause, yet democracy, in other words, a cause for the majority in this country. Now, shall we then blame them for doing that? I don't think that we should under such circumstances. And therefore, when we deal with these questions, it's quite important that when we reflect on them, we must also take into account some of these dynamics as they manifested themselves in a socio-political space, so that we're able to adequately, in a sense, reflect on them, but also reflect on them in such a manner that they inform our perspective in transforming both the institution of policing, but also society. So in different degrees, apartheid being a social system affected all areas of social endeavor. And therefore, there are questions that, in a sense, when people say that there are former apartheid police in terms of the leadership of the existing leadership of the police, or former special branch members and so forth in the police and so on, shall then ask whether or not can the party and any other show us one organization or one institution in this country or one community and any form of social organization that was not infiltrated by agents representing apartheid colonial interests. And can the party or anyone give us one instance where such intelligence operations did not lead to death and social pain? The backgrounds of police officers who occupy key positions today in the police are overboard. And we have spoken to these issues before. We have also publicized their profiles in terms of who they are and so forth. And indeed, if people have information that we do not possess, that is not in our possession, that the only thing they could do is to help us by providing such information. The same also goes that if we are critical of how we do our work as the police, the Constitution is very clear. It sets up key critical institutions of us as ordinary members of this society, for an example, to take up grievances and issues and pursue them. For an example, if we are aggrieved by how the police are behaving themselves, we have IPID. In the case of the Hawks, for an example, you have a DPCI judge, but also you are not exclusively channeled to only just deal with the DPCI judge. You can also go to IPID and both the IPID and DPCI judge to complain about how these institutions, Hawks in particular, or any other institution of policing, is behaving and trampling on the rights of individuals collectively and otherwise. So you can do that. But also you can elect not to, and approach a court of law, to therefore raise the grievances that you as an individual member of society and or a collective formation of our citizenry can then take up such matters. However, the key point, though, on this matter is that these articulations are extremely divisive. It is an issue that cannot be taken to its logical conclusion. It has a potential to tear the country apart for if we must punish some people for having worked for police intelligence, then we must punish all those who worked for colonial and colonialism of a special type intelligence services, because all of them, as the party would say, served the crime against humanity. So for us, the manner of argumentation is utterly irresponsible and unsustainable. And because we work in the security environment, we can only advise all and sundry. Just simply do not go there. It is not worth our efforts. We must work for unity and not division. Our people have a shared destiny. And let us accept that people, like everything else in nature, South Africa must be, like everything else in nature, change. South Africa must be a home for all South Africans, and there shall be no step South Africans. Because if you have step South Africans, then of course it means you do not have sound basis for equality, for an example, in our society. And the fact remains that when South Africans are unhappy about some of our actions, let them challenge us in court, as I had suggested, but also through these other institutions that I had referred to. And we do prefer to be challenged in court precisely because the powers that we hold as a police restrict or hinder people's freedoms. Where courts clarify issues, society benefits, including the police, who then gain a better understanding on how to handle certain matters in an evolving democracy. And ladies and gentlemen, many of us have a responsibility to lead South African society from various platforms. And in this regard, we must say that we are fortunate. However, we must remember that we have an obligation to lead well to the best of our abilities. And having said so, let me also just stress one particular point. We are seeing a particular growing tendency, for an example, of attacking public officials. Now, that tendency itself is extremely dangerous. For starters, for an example, I heard yesterday that the NDPP was addressing a media conference somewhere. And in response to such, I began hearing political party leadership of some other quarter referring to the NDPP in the light of the decision that they've taken, that he's nothing else except that he's there to serve the political objectives of the head of state, President Zuma. Now, that's an unfortunate thing to say in the first instance by a political leader. It is unfortunate in a sense that, firstly, the public official concerned, the NDPP, is not a political operative. It's not a politician. And he doesn't have a platform to express an opinion about such statements, for an example. So the same also goes with, let's say, for instance, the two officials that are here, the acting national commissioner, the head of DPCI. If you attack them politically, they don't have a platform to respond to some of those issues. So it becomes an unfair exercise to subject them to political criticism. And the Constitution is quite clear, by the way, on the question of who takes political responsibility for these institutions. Both Section 206 and Section 207 expressly talk to the issue of the responsibility of policing constitutionally. Where does it lie, and so it goes. Now, so to have a situation where we begin to want them to be politicians, I think is completely wrong. I'm saying want them to be politicians in the sense that all that we do are politicians, but then we criticize them politically. We say they are holding a particular political agenda. And that's a political criticism. It has nothing to do with operations. It has everything to do with what you perceive to be their leaning, for an example, politically and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that they are officials that do not have a platform politically to then respond to such accusations of sorts. So it becomes unfair in that particular instance. However, should any one of us feel aggrieved and feel that DPCI, for an example, is pursuing a political agenda, so let's use constitutional institutions created by the Constitution. be it your IPID, be it your court, be it the DPCI judge, amongst other things, and so on. And by so doing, I think we would be acting quite responsibly. And then, of course, the officials, should they be found to be on the wrong, they must then be held accountable, and necessary sort of correct action would then have to be effectively taken to correct them in case they would have entered a space that they shouldn't have, for an example, entered. So I want to leave it at that, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Minister. We'll then open this session for comments directly. And as such, we will be taking about 5 questions at a go. Start in Victoria, and thereafter we'll go to Cape. So we'll then ask colleagues from the media to identify yourselves and the organization that you represent. So, in a show of hands, get an indication.
Super Stilman from SABC TV News. Recently, we were at a seminar with ISS, and it had suggested that the controversies around the Hawks and the possible charging of the minister, as it was reported, Pravin Gordhan, are creating a sort of he was suggesting that perhaps Hawks should be removed from the police because the controversies around the Hawks are damaging what it was, what the ISS calls the good work that the police is now doing. So what is your comment on the suggestions that, Hawks are mired in controversy and they could possibly taint the image of the police unit as a whole? And regarding your statement, Minister, that public officials are facing criticism, like the head of NPA, but their decisions naturally have political implications. So is it not just if those interested parties then comment, because we can't run away from the fact that while they are not politicians, their decisions do have political implications. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruben.
Good morning to the panel. It's Barry Bateman, Eyewitness News. It follows on from my colleague's question related to what you perceive to be unfair criticism of public individuals. And if we look at Advocate Abrams, his first major decision that he made in office was essentially quite clearly a political one. He defied prosecutor advice and he withdrew charges against his deputy, Nomqobo Jiba. And the same criticism perhaps applies to members in the police, where there is adverse findings against senior police officials, yet these police officials retain high-ranking positions. So perhaps the criticism where it's coming from, and you say that they don't have a political platform to defend themselves. Advocate Abrams had more than enough platform yesterday to defend himself, and he did go to great extents to do so. But perhaps the issue here is that yourself, Abrams, senior police, you just simply lack credibility. So when you say something, the public just doesn't believe you. So isn't that the issue that you should be addressing, is try and gain credibility, and so the public believes you when you say something is so, that they believe it to be true? Thank you.
Is there another question? Sir.
Morning, Michael Apple, N7. My question is to Lieutenant General Mhlaneza. Yesterday we got clarification from the NDPP that no charges of espionage are being investigated against the Finance Minister, Pravin Gordhan. There is no imminent arrest, as some weekend papers submitted. Could we just get some clarification? He seemed to suggest that these questions should be put to the General. If we could just get an update of what is being investigated and the state of that investigation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Amanda Watson from the Citizen. Minister, you admitted in the Constitutional Court last week that you acted unconstitutionally. What are you going to resign? And if not, why not? Because we want someone who's prepared to fight to the death for our constitution.
Is that together?
Yeah.
Okay.
Except that you're just simply not clarifying acting unconstitutionally in regard of what, in respect of what exactly. Perhaps he needs to be given an opportunity to clarify the question.
Okay.
Come back to me later.
Okay, Minister, I think let's
No, but let's correct this thing. You want to come back to me later. You're asking a question about me acting unconstitutionally, and yet you wait, and yet you do not know what you're talking about. Because what you should be saying is that in respect of this particular matter and this matter, this is what is either alleged or I have admitted to acting unconstitutionally, and so forth. And this is where I have a problem with. Because you should base your questions on the actual thing, not just perception. Now the problem is you're asking this question, you're unable to substantiate it. You're saying you'll come back to me later, and that's what I don't think it's actually fair.
You're right.
Okay, thank you.
You said in court, or your lawyer said on your behalf in court, that you acted unconstitutionally in the prior suspension.
Yeah, no, okay, so you're referring to the McBride question. Okay, okay, no, that's fine. That clarifies it. I'll respond to that. Okay, let me let me start with perhaps the first question, Mr. Stillman. Okay, Stillman. The question of the independence of the Hawks. You must remember that there is a constitutional court ruling on the issue of the independence of the Hawks, and it's very firm on this question in clarifying the actual location of the Hawks. In fact, the court expressly found nothing wrong. That's what it said, with the location of the Hawks, where it is, and so on. Now, I understand that you're raising this issue from merely a point of an engagement, because that was a seminar that we had, which also involved ISS and so forth. They have a right to hold particular views and or perceptions, for an example. But the question arises, the so-called controversies, who creates them? And that's a question that has never been interrogated. Who creates them? Certain people plant these things, and they want these things to be believed, and they are driven from a particular angle and so on. And then we stand on the other side and say, yeah, we decry controversy and so forth. That's the issue that we should be talking to. The camera is obscuring your beautiful face there. I want to see you. Cameraman, sorry. So the question that we need to be confronting, all of us as South Africans, was these issues, if they are not confronted, they have a potential to actually dilute our democratic standing as a country. So that's what we need to begin to enter into. And in fact, let me just say, maybe let me hook up this point with the other point about, I think it was raised by the gentleman from AN7 about the question of charges and investigation and whatever and so forth. That point has been clarified over and over and over again about what exactly is being investigated. And I've been asked very funny questions. What charges are being investigated? Now, you can't investigate a charge. A charge is the product of an investigation. So the fact of the matter is that, yes, there are investigations, there are inquiries, whatever they are around the question, for instance, of the SARS rogue unit. And you all know that. And that issue has been clarified, for an example. So I just don't understand, in a sense, what it is. And you seem to think that if for an example, I think Mr. Barry Bateman relates to, talks about the issue of what transpired yesterday. And of course, I'm not going to speak for the NDPP in this regard, but all these particular institutions are governed by law and particular prescripts in terms of how they need to deal and consider issues, for an example. Now, and then we're told there are political implications. It's the same thing. I mean, at some point, we were, I think there was a matter affecting the Hawks or something, and the reaction was quite amazing at the political level about the so-called political connotations. And I asked one question. If you, as a journalist, Mr. Bateman, you are rushing to this particular press conference, this very same one, and here on Pretoria Street or Skuman, you are not observing the regulations, the traffic regulations, for instance, amongst other things, you go, you take a cross in a red traffic light, and that's a traffic offense. So the traffic cop stops you. The next thing that you begin to allege, oh yeah, I'm being stopped because I'm being avoided to arrive on time at the press conference. Now that's not a fair accusation. The traffic cop is doing his or her work, and it's got nothing to do with your press conference that you're rushing to. But there's everything to do with Road Ordinance Act of 1960 or whatever, National Traffic Act or something, being a consideration, and because it is a consideration, therefore, you would have violated the traffic law and so on. Now, I don't know what you're referring to about lack of credibility. I don't know what that means. Truly speaking, it's actually the same as the same question as the one that Mr. Watson has raised, but at least he has now clarified it, and I'm happy about that. Now, the issue is this, Mr. Watson. At the time, the Minister of Police took a decision to suspend Mr. McBride. He acted on the basis of an existing law, and that law exists as we speak. The IPID Act, Section 6, Subsection 6. Right? It exists. It's a valid law. Now, lawyers will tell you what is meant by a law being valid. It's a valid law. So there's no acting unconstitutionally, for an example. However, the matter was taken to the High Court, and the High Court expressed an opinion on the basis of an existing law, which is Section 6, Subsection 6. Now, and said that matter must then, and that's how the matter landed, for instance, at the Constitutional Court. For the Constitutional Court to actually test that very same law, in terms of constitutional value, standing, and everything else that is being considered there and so forth. But it is a valid law. It's a law that is in our statute as we speak. So I think you're too quick to then say I acted unconstitutionally, because something that would be defined and classified as unconstitutional, it would be something else. But in this case, the Minister of Police acted in accordance with that law and that specific provision, and that is acknowledged in court. Even in the Constitutional Court itself, deliberations, the court has not said that the Minister of Police acted, what do they call it, Deputy Minister Malafides, I think something like that, or any other, for instance, by the mere fact that I instituted that particular act and so forth. So, but as you would know, a judgment is reserved and it would be issued at whatever point. Now, I think the last question is relating to charges. Again, there are no charges. I mean, I don't know what people are talking about when they talk about charges. There absolutely, I think, is a question from the gentleman from AM7. There are no charges. There can only be charges as and when an investigation is completed and people are cited in whatever manner that they would be cited and so forth. And of course, the necessary sort of legal process and cause will then ensue. in a sense. But at this stage, no charges. There is whatever work that is being done at that level. And therefore, it would also be incorrect for us to want to talk about investigations, for an example. At this level, an investigation is an investigation, and that process has got to be respected fully and firmly. Thanks.
Thanks, Minister. Do we have questions in Cape Town?
Yeah, this week, what do you plan?
Good morning, Minister. Bianca Caposorio from the Sunday Times. Could you please confirm whether you, in the past few weeks, have briefed Cabinet regarding the matter between the Hawks and the Finance Minister, the investigation?
Paul?
Morning, Minister. Paul Vecchiato from Bloomberg. Yeah, sticking with Minister Gordon, you say there are no charges, and now you've just said there's no investigation. I just want you to clarify, is there an investigation? There is an investigation. What is the investigation into? Thank you.
Mr. Kruiwagen. Good morning, Minister. Dennis Kruiwagen, The New Age. Linked to both questions, who are these people, do you think, who would be leaking information to newspapers? Back to you, Pretoria.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry I had to laugh at the last question, because that question can't be directed to the Minister of Police. The question of who's leaking these issues to the newspapers and so forth. I think newspapers do know very well. At least I also would have to respect some of the newspapers who have shed some light in this regard confidentially. So I wouldn't want to disclose necessarily in terms of what they say or allege, for instance, when it comes to such issues. The fact of the matter is that all of us as South Africans must also be concerned about these newspaper leaks, because all they are intended to do is to compromise key critical institutions, but also compromise processes that are underway. Now, if you compromise processes that are necessary ingredients, for instance, insofar as the whole concept of the rule of law, it means the ultimate end is to compromise the rule of law itself and so on. So we should actually be wary about such developments in our society. We cannot be proud that we are flooded with this particular sort of leaks, for instance, at a media level, that do not benefit any institution, do not benefit the democratic state, do not benefit the majority interests and so forth. So it's a problem to have these kinds of leaks as we have them. But I think some of you can shed some light about the leaks and how these things get leaked to yourselves. The gentleman from Bloomberg down in Cape Town says I said there's no investigation. Now, all of you were seated here when I spoke to you now. And you know very well I'd never said that there's no investigation. So I'm even at a loss in terms of how I have got to respond to this question, because it's something that is happening here and now. We all know I never said there's no investigation. And he says that I said there's no investigation here and now. So there's a problem. Now, we have spoken to this issue about the work that DPCI are involved in insofar as the allegations of the existence of a rogue unit. I've spoken to that particular matter. All I clarified was there's this strange question that keeps on arising. it arose in Cape Town, it also arose here, it arose at any other platform and so on. What charges are you investigating? You can't investigate a charge, ladies and gentlemen. A charge is a product of an investigation. That's all that I was clarifying. You can only investigate transgressions, but not charges, because charges are things are actually steps that get taken and subjected to a legal process, such as a court process, for an example. And that's a different matter altogether. Can I confirm whether I briefed Cabinet? Now, in other words, what Ms. Bianca is talking to is that indeed I must have briefed Cabinet. So it means there's that kind of assertion about Cabinet briefing and so on. Now, I don't know where that comes from. I've heard so many different stories, by the way, by different journalists about what must have transpired in Cabinet, for an example, including what they wanted to write this particular Sunday and so forth, about some particular happening that must have taken place in Cabinet. Again, I do not know where these things come from and who whispers in your ear all these sorts of other manner of things that just simply do not exist. And so it goes. Now, I've just spoken about the issue of investigations. Now, you can't subject an investigation unless you subjected it to its own particular processes, for an example. Because an investigation is an investigation. So, and that's what needs to be respected, and that's why I was saying, look, don't come here and think that you are going to ask me a question. At what stage is your investigation? What exactly are you investigating, and so forth? Because that particular step or exercise has got to be respected and be insulated at all material times, because from the onset, when you deal with such issues, you must always factor the principle of fairness. You must be just in your approach from time to time and so forth. So you can't, loosely talk about the actual detail and the nitty-gritties of an investigation and so on, because that in itself violates key critical principles of ensuring that at all material times, even the investigation itself must be fair, it must be just, so that it has to arrive at the correct sort of and relative sort of conclusions. Yeah, so let me leave it at that point. But I would hope the gentleman from Bloomberg is clarified that I did not say that there's no investigation. I didn't say that now, didn't say that yesterday, or at any other given point.
Can we take the last round of questions? Let's go back to Cape Town first. We'll come back. Cape Town, do you have given the last round?
Yes, we do, Mr. Nhleko.
Let's look.
Thank you, Brigadier. How about these officers telling us how they feel when they're being told they are apartheid stooges or whatever?
Can I just also respond to that question? Again, it's exactly what I've spoken to. And I'm trying to dissuade any one of us, be it journalist, be it politician, be it whatever, and so forth. This question, for instance, what it solicits, what it seeks to do, is that they now must respond politically. Now we are saying these are police officials that you want to convert into politicians. Now, that can be correct. So I'm just saying, I've spoken to this thing. If we all claim to harbor the interests that we say we harbor for this democracy, for an example, let us respect the fact that government officials of this nature and any other nature, for an example, let us not try and convert them into political activists nor politicians of sorts, for an example. Because this question, for instance, what it seeks to do is that they must now respond, politically, and I don't think that's correct. I've already clarified that particular point. If we go that route with this society of ours, we'll absolutely get to absolutely nowhere. The next thing you'll be asking me, whether do I view my teachers, for instance, because I went to school during the days of apartheid. Do I consider them as apartheid teachers, for an example? I don't think so. Many of you were journalists during the days of apartheid. Do I consider you as apartheid journalist? I don't. Let us accept that apartheid existed as a particular social system that had to be defeated, and we had to defeat it. Now, but the fact of the matter is that we all know where we stand in relation to the aspirations of the majority in this particular country.
That was Police Minister Nhleko on the media.
And so it goes. So these accusations, for me, they just simply do not assist us, if I may put it that way, because they just do not help in any particular way. So I thought, let me just deal with this issue, because it goes back to exactly the point that I addressed earlier on, that we're now faced with a situation where some of our people who, yes, of course, functioned in this particular institution during the days of apartheid are being labeled as apartheid stooges, as the gentleman down in Cape Town says.
Last question from Cape Town, Shirley.
Hi, it's Bianca from the Sunday Times again. Apologies for the phrasing of my question earlier. I just wanted to, as a point of clarity, rephrase it and ask you in a simple yes or no question. Has Cabinet been briefed on the matter?
Okay.
Back to Pretoria.
Thanks, Pretoria. Only two, thanks. Okay, let's start from...
Good morning, Anton Meyer from Pretoria FM.
How can you be confused about your employer? That's very... that can't be fair. Is it Pretoria or Jacaranda?
No, I moved from Jacaranda to Pretoria.
I see. So you're still confused about it. All right.
Minister, aren't you opening yourself up to criticism from people or political parties by dipping your toes into the political fire pool, for instance, by investigating EFF leader Julius Malema for high treason after he made a political statement? Is that matter?
Okay.
Oh,
okay.
From SABC.
Let me in terms of the current assignment to. So I speak for the portfolio of police, and I think that should then clarify this point about, for instance, the gentleman here says, yeah, we are not giving satisfactory answer. We want to hear from them. And so now, I don't know what that means, really. There is one portfolio of police, and you say you want to hear from themselves whether they are exactly what you allege them to be, and so on. I don't know what that means, really. I've already responded to that issue. Mr. Mayor says, am I not opening myself up to criticism? I don't have a problem with criticism. The criticism that I'm looking forward to must be fair, must be constructive. In fact, to think that I can be in this particular position and or portfolio, for an example, and think that I should not be criticized, I think it would be completely wrong. However, what I'm saying is that, look, criticize all you like, but criticize from a point that you know that you yourself, you are just fair in your criticism. You are not malicious. You also seek to build us, as I had said, that the police as an institution and as this particular portfolio can only gain from criticism. For an example, for us to do our work much more better and so forth. And as you say, Mr. Mayor, I have spoken to the issue of investigations. You're saying, am I not opening myself up? No. The one thing is that an institution such as the policing, for an example, functions on the basis of instruments, be it orders, regulations, policy, law, and whatever. And so it functions in accordance with that. So if an institution takes a decision, for an example, to conduct an investigation, it will conduct an investigation informed by what the law says, what the standing orders say, what policy says, and so forth, and so it goes. So to think that you will not do that because you'll be criticized, I think also it's incorrect. It's incorrect. You should just simply stick to what the law says, stick to what the principle says, stick to what policy says and what the regulation says and what standing order says. Simple as that. Because if you're going to use your own whims as a person, for an example, again, that compromises our own democratic standing and so on. The reason why you have these instruments are there to ensure that processes are just and fair for us to arrive at correct logical sort of conclusions. On the question of leaks, Mr. Bateman, I do not see how. I mean, that's an opinion that you hold. You think that if I leak information to you, it benefits us as society and so forth. It just simply doesn't. I don't see how. I'll give you a practical example. Suppose I'm being investigated, for an example, for criminal activity, for goat stealing. I'm part of a particular, I don't know why I like goats, but perhaps I belong to a particular sort of gang of sorts that steals goats. Now, the fact that you would have been given that information, and the information says the police are just about to pounce on you for stealing goats in the Northwest, for an example. So how does that benefit society? How does that benefit you? Of course, it benefits me as a suspect, for an example. It would. Because now I would know, hey, they're just about to pounce on me, and therefore it means these are the maneuvers that I would have to embark on to try and thwart the the investigation and or arrest, for an example, and so on. So there's no benefit. I disagree with that particular point. I accept that all the issues, the examples that you have made, there have been leaks about them. Be it the renditions, yes, leaked, and so forth. But it does not necessarily mean that, therefore, because they were leaked, it means that's correct, and they were correct, and so forth. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I just perhaps hold a differing sort of opinion there, because a leak can only serve to compromise an investigation. It can't benefit an investigation, not at all.
I didn't suggest in any way that they were, in any sense, good for society. I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying the adoption, in terms of a position from the police to leaks, in those particular instances that I mentioned, those particular cases, in all of them, they were the basis for investigations.
No, but
the
if
media, the police then picked up and initiated an investigation.
But even that one too cannot be correct, because now you are telling us that we investigated because you exposed, you wrote about it. Now the police don't write. It's not our duty to write articles in newspapers and so on. So we would pick up information, for an example, and we would not necessarily come to you as a newspaper or the television station and say, you know what we have picked up? We picked up that there was the issue of the illegal renditions, for an example. So how do you then assume that because we did not do that, so you wrote about that issue, it means you exposed the thing and therefore that triggered the police to investigate? So it's an arguable point that we are the original source of information around this thing. I really don't. I really. No, of course, you may have exposed those particular issues. I agree, but that does not mean that you were the original source, and therefore the police were not, and so forth. I disagree with that assertion. The question of the IPID independence. I can't remember exactly, Mr. Skripman, what you wanted to be clarified on, but I think I would link this response to the question that was asked by the lady at the back there. I do not know why institutions are individuals in your mind. Institutions are institutions, in the same way that what newspaper do you come from? ENCA. ENCA is not you, for an example. You're just a journalist for ENCA. So to think that if you get dismissed or suspended by ENCA, so ENCA lacks credibility, ENCA will not exist and so forth, is fallacy. So the fact that you had a suspension of Mr. McBride, for an example, does not necessarily mean that you don't have an IPID that exists. An IPID exists as an institution, whether there is an individual there or that individual is not there. So we can't begin to advocate for a personality cult, for instance, in institutions of governance, because that, again, is self-defeating, if I may put it that way. So there's no such a thing. As we speak, you have qualified and professional investigators on the side of IPID that are still all out there in the country, do good, basically going on and about doing their work as they know, to the best of their ability and so forth. And that has got nothing to do with whether somebody was suspended or not suspended. So the institution exists. That's the most important sort of aspect. Now, of course, the question of independence, it's independent. For for instance, we have a founding act establishing IPID. And that act, Mr. Stillman, I'll encourage you to read it before you ask any question, because it's very important. It will tell you what the mandate is and how their work is to be done, but also the reporting line is very clear in terms of the existing act. Okay? It's independent precisely because you can't have police investigating themselves. So you need an arm of government that stands out there on its own, that investigates the conduct of the police. For an example, if you remember, Mr. Stillman is aggrieved because the police did whatever they did to him, you must then be able to go to IPID and say, IPID, I have this particular grievance insofar as the conduct of the police is concerned. And therefore, and IPID has got standing sort of stipulations about how it has got to deal with such complaints and or grievances from the side of our society. So we agree with that. But the IPID Act, as we speak, is a valid piece of legislation that is there. It exists, including Section 6, Section 6, which, of course, is now a matter in contestation before the Constitutional Court, and we'll hear at a later point in terms of how that matter is being looked into. The last question was about, no, not a, the issue about political meddling and so forth. I don't know who's meddling who, except to say that if the suggestion is that the police are politically meddling, it's a very, I don't know how to characterize that particular suggestion or accusation for that matter. And all I'm saying is that insofar as the conduct of the police, in case there are issues that we are aggrieved about and so forth, it will only serve us best to basically follow the constitutional dictates in addressing those particular matters. It just can't be that you form an opinion that they are acting politically and so forth, and you can't even substantiate that, but you are making that accusation because that's what you perceive, amongst other things. It cannot be correct, absolutely. And of course, in case you feel that you really have valid reasons and basis for such an accusation, of course, substantiate your accusation, take the matter up, take it up even with court itself, with the court of law in this country, for that matter to be objectively sort of looked into and ruled upon correctly. And I said that should it be the case that any of the officials, for an example, are found to be on the wrong, we are duty bound to act and correct such particular matters from our end, for an example, as the political, as the responsible political authority within this particular institution. Thank you very much. There is the issue about the lady. Did you say Hamaskara? And you corrected and said no. Abi? Is it still Hamaskara? Okay.
I can't take that one.
So the general tells me here that finally he's liberated to speak and say something about. So, Samaskar,
Thanks, Minister. Just in short, you'll know that violence erupted yesterday in Amenskral, an area called Sikampaning. I think there was an eviction underway, which we can say that that eviction went wrong to the extent that some buses were torched, and I think they were. The report I got last was that there were 2 people killed in the process. They were attacked by the community. And we, as the South African Police Service, have done the necessary in terms of deployment, and I did not get any reports overnight of any violence. We continued our visibility in the area, and that also would have been the case since this morning. So I'm not in a position to provide you with the latest information on that, since not much was reported from a violence perspective and so on overnight. Thank you very much.
The follow-up question from Cape Town, Chair.
Unfortunately, we can't because it's another press conference that has taken the next 5 minutes, so we'll do that later on. Thank you. This brings us to the end of the press conference. For those who want to do one-on-one, let's do them now.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Cape Town.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Do you know switch? Did you drink switch? You can have this other switch.
Oh, I saw there's something called.
Did you drink it?
No, I
Colleagues, in Pretoria, Cape Town, the Chief of the South African National Defence Force will brief the media at 12.
Okay, so what time is the flight out? Go by the way. We are taking our...
Let me just... Okay, but then...